I found the texts on a Tuesday. Not my texts, not texts sent to me. Texts my brother Marcus sent to my ex-wife Julia over the span of 4 years. 4 years. I stood in the kitchen of the house I no longer lived in, holding Julia's old phone that she'd left behind in a box of things she said I could throw away, and I read every single one of them. And by the time I finished, I understood that my marriage hadn't just fallen apart. It had been taken from me. Piece by piece, lie by lie, by the one person I would have trusted with my life. My brothers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because if I don't, none of this is going to make sense. And trust me, you need to understand where we started to fully feel the weight of where this ends. My name is Daniel, I'm 38 years old. I grew up in a small city in Ohio, the middle child of 3 boys. My older brother Marcus was 5 years ahead of me. My younger brother Eli was 3 years behind. We weren't a perfect family, no family is, but we were close. My mother worked 2 jobs most of my childhood. My father was present mostly, though he had a temper that filled rooms. Marcus was the golden child, first to graduate college, first to get a real job, first to buy a house. I admired him, I genuinely did. He was sharp, charming, the kind of man who walked into rooms and immediately became the center of them. And when I met Julia at 26, Marcus was the first person I called. I remember exactly what he said. He said, "Danny, don't screw this up." I laughed, I thought he was joking. I didn't screw it up, not right away anyway. Julia and I dated for 2 years before I proposed. We got married on a Saturday in September, and Marcus was my best man. He gave a speech that made my mother cry, and made Julia laugh so hard she had to dab her eyes with her napkin. He hugged me at the end of the night and said, "I'm proud of you, man, you deserve this." I believed him. For almost 5 years, I believed every single word he ever said to me. Our marriage wasn't perfect, what marriage is. Julia and I argued about money sometimes, about whose turn it was to visit which family during the holidays, about whether we were ready to have kids. Normal things, real things, things that every couple navigates. But somewhere around year 3, things started to shift. Julia became quieter, more withdrawn. There were moments where I'd catch her looking at me in this strange way, like she was searching for something in my face that she couldn't find. I noticed, of course I noticed. But every time I asked her what was wrong, she'd say the same thing. She'd say, "Marcus told me something." At first, I didn't think much of it. Marcus and Julia had always gotten along well. Too well maybe, but I'd never let myself go there. He was my brother, she was my wife. I trusted them both. So when Julia would mention his name, I'd ask what he said, and she'd get vague. He just said, "You've been stressed at work." He mentioned, "You've been complaining about our relationship." He told me, "You said you weren't sure you were ready to be a husband." And I'd frown, I'd tell her I never said those things. And she'd look at me with that searching expression again and say, "Well, that's what he told me." I confronted Marcus twice in those early years. Both times he laughed it off. "Danny, I was just making conversation. I didn't mean anything by it." I think Julia misunderstood me, you know how she is. And here's the thing that makes me sick to remember, I believed him. Because he was my brother. Because I thought I knew who he was. Because I had no idea, none at all, that behind my back, on a phone I would not see for another 4 years, Marcus was building something. Slowly, carefully, deliberately. He was building the end of my marriage. And he had started before Julia, and I even said I do. I want you to understand something before I tell you what was in those texts. Marcus was not a jealous man, at least that's what I always believed. He had more than me by almost every measure. Better salary, nicer house. A longer list of achievements he could recite at family dinners without even trying. So when I read his text to Julia for the first time, I kept asking myself, why? Why would he do this? What was there to gain? I'll come back to that, because the answer, when I finally understood it, changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. But first, the texts. I need to tell you what Marcus actually said. Because it wasn't just gossip. It wasn't just a brother saying careless things. It was a campaign. The first messages dated back to about 8 months before my wedding. Marcus had texted Julia saying he was worried about me, that I'd been confiding in him, that I apparently had told him I wasn't sure Julia was the right woman for me, that I was only proposing because I felt pressured. I never said that, not even close. But Julia didn't know that yet. She'd responded asking if she should be concerned. Marcus had written back, and I'm paraphrasing because I need to be careful about how much of this I put into words, but he'd essentially told her that he hoped she wasn't making a mistake, that he wanted to be honest with her because he cared about her. Because he cared about her. That phrase landed like a stone in my chest when I read it. 8 months before I married her, my brother was telling my fiancée that he cared about her in a way that had nothing to do with family. I kept reading. The messages slowed after the wedding. Weeks would go by with nothing. But they never stopped entirely. Every few months, Marcus would reach out, always under the guise of being concerned, always framing himself as the honest one, the one brave enough to tell her things I apparently wouldn't. Daniel gets like this sometimes. He shuts down. I just want you to know it's not your fault. I'm sure he loves you. I just worry he doesn't know how to show it the way you deserve. He mentioned to me last week that he's been feeling trapped. I think he just needs space but didn't want to worry you. None of it was true. Every single message was a fabrication. A small, perfectly crafted lie designed to do one thing: make Julia doubt me. And here is what's so devastating about it. Marcus knew Julia. He knew she was anxious. He knew she had a fear of abandonment rooted in watching her own parents' marriage dissolve when she was 12. He knew exactly which cracks to push on. And he pushed. For 4 years, he pushed. I read texts where Julia begged him to stop, where she told him she didn't want to hear it anymore, where she said she was trying to trust her husband and Marcus was making it impossible. And do you know what Marcus wrote back every time she pushed him away? He'd apologize, he'd say he crossed a line, he'd give it a few weeks. And then he'd come back. I know I said I'd stop, but I saw something at Mom's house last week and I have to tell you, I don't think Daniel is being honest with you about his finances. That last one destroyed what was left of us. In year 4 of our marriage, Julia and I had been fighting about money, real fighting. The kind that leaves you exhausted and hollow. I had taken a financial risk on a small business venture that didn't pan out. We lost a significant amount, and I was ashamed and I handled it badly. I was closed off, defensive. Marcus knew about it because I'd told him in confidence. In confidence. And he told Julia not what actually happened, not that I'd made a mistake and was trying to fix it, but a version of it. A version where I'd been secretly hiding debt. A version where I was lying to her face about our future. Julia had already been living with 4 years of these quiet doubts. She was already fragile. That was the thing that broke her. She filed for divorce 6 months later. I was blindsided. Not because the marriage was perfect, it wasn't, but because every time I'd reached for her in those final months, she'd pulled back. Every conversation about rebuilding felt like a door closing in my face. And I didn't understand why. I thought I had failed her. For 2 years after the divorce, I carried that. I thought I was the reason. I spent 2 years believing I had been a bad husband, a dishonest man, someone who didn't deserve what he had. And Marcus had sat across from me at family dinners during all of it. He had put his hand on my shoulder. He had said, "You'll get through this, man, I believe in you." I had thanked him. The box was Julia's idea. We'd stayed on reasonable terms after the divorce. No children to complicate things, just 2 people who had loved each other and then somehow hadn't. Or so I thought. About 2.5 years after we signed the papers, Julia reached out. She asked if I'd come get the last of my things from the storage unit she'd kept. I went on a Saturday morning in late November. Most of the boxes were mine, old books, some equipment from my business, a few things from before we were even together. But there was one box labeled miscellaneous that had some of her old things mixed in, old electronics, a tablet she didn't use anymore, 2 phones. She told me I could toss whatever I didn't want. I almost tossed all of it. I don't know what made me turn one of those phones on. Maybe instinct, maybe fate, maybe just the particular cruelty of a universe that decided I needed to know. The phone had been dead. I found an old charging cable in the same box, plugged it in my car and waited. It came on. No lock screen. And the last app she'd opened, the very last thing she'd looked at on that phone was her messages. With Marcus. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours. I read every message from the beginning. And about 40 minutes in, I hit the part that changed the entire shape of everything I thought I understood. Because it wasn't just that Marcus had been planting doubts about me. There was more. In year 2 of my marriage, Marcus had begun telling Julia that he had feelings for her. Not directly at first. It was subtle, the kind of careful language a person uses when they want to say something without being held accountable for saying it. I don't know why I keep reaching out, I just feel like we understand each other. Sometimes I think about what things would have been like if timing was different. You deserve someone who sees you the way I see you. Julia had shut it down hard. She had told him that what he was saying was inappropriate, that he was her husband's brother, that he needed to stop. And Marcus had apologized, profusely. He'd said he respected her completely. He said he was going through something personal and crossed a line. Julia had apparently not told me because she didn't want to destroy my relationship with my brother. She had protected me from that. She had carried it alone. But Marcus hadn't stopped. He'd just become more careful. He dropped the romantic angle and returned to the slow drip of doubt. More strategic, more patient. Because I think, and I have had a long time now to think about this, I think Marcus didn't necessarily want Julia for himself. What Marcus wanted was to prove something. He had spent his entire life being the golden one, the accomplished one, the one our parents were proudest of. And then I had something he didn't. Not money, not status. I had Julia. I had a partnership that looked, from the outside, like the kind of quiet happiness that can't be manufactured. And Marcus, perfect, successful, admired Marcus, was alone. Had been alone for years. His last relationship had ended badly. He didn't talk about it. Our mother had once let slip that the woman had called Marcus emotionally unavailable. I'd felt sorry for him when I heard that. I had felt sorry for him. Now I was sitting in a parking lot in November with cold air seeping through my car windows, reading the proof that my brother had spent 4 years dismantling my life, because he could not stand that I had built something he envied. He never wanted Julia. He just didn't want me to have her. I drove home. I didn't call anyone. I didn't eat that night. I sat with the phone in my hands for hours, going back through the messages again and again, as if rereading them would somehow change what they said. They didn't change. I thought about confronting him immediately. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about forwarding every message to Julia with a note that just said, "Do you see? Do you finally see what happened to us?" I didn't do any of those things that night. Because I had learned something from 2 years of quietly rebuilding my life after a divorce I didn't understand. I had learned how to be patient. And I was going to need that patience now. Because I wasn't going to just confront Marcus. I was going to make sure when it happened that there was nowhere left for him to hide. I gave myself 3 weeks. 3 weeks to think clearly, to make a plan, to decide what I actually wanted to come out of this. Because here's the thing about revenge, and I say this as someone who has now been on the other side of it, revenge without a goal is just destruction. I didn't want to destroy Marcus. I wanted him to know that I knew. I wanted my family to know. And if I'm being honest, truly honest, I wanted Julia to know that none of it had been my fault. That was the part that mattered most. She had spent 4 years doubting me. She had left a marriage based on lies fed to her by someone who was supposed to be family. She deserved the truth. So I started there. I made copies of the most significant messages. enough to tell the full story without requiring someone to read all of it at once. Then I called Julia. It was a Sunday afternoon. She picked up on the third ring and her voice was careful, the way it always is when we talk now, polite and a little guarded. I told her I'd found something on the phone from the storage unit. There was a long silence. And then she said, "Daniel, I already know." I did not expect that. I didn't know what to say. She told me she'd found some of the messages herself about 6 months after the divorce, when she'd gone looking for a photo on that old phone. She hadn't read all of them, but she'd read enough. She said she hadn't told me because she didn't know how, because she felt responsible for not seeing it sooner, for letting his words get inside her head, for not fighting harder for us. She cried. I cried. We stayed on that phone call for 2 hours. And somewhere in the middle of it, she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "I think I always knew something was off, but I trusted him because you trusted him, and that felt like enough." That hit me harder than I expected. Because it was true. My trust in Marcus had been the door he walked through to reach her. After that call, Julia and I agreed on one thing: Marcus needed to face what he'd done. Not with police, not with lawyers, there was nothing technically criminal in what he'd done, as much as it felt like a crime. We decided on family. We decided that the people who had always loved and admired Marcus, our parents, our younger brother Eli, our aunts and uncles who came to every holiday, those were the people who deserved to know who he actually was. I called my mother first. That was the hardest call I have ever made. My mother loved Marcus in a way that had its own particular weight. He was her firstborn, the one who had validated every sacrifice she'd ever made. When I told her I needed to come over and show her something, she heard it in my voice. She said, "What did he do?" She already knew something was wrong. Mothers do. I went to my parents' house on a Thursday evening. My father was there. Eli had driven 2 hours because I'd asked him to. Marcus was not there. I had specifically not told him. I sat at the kitchen table where we had eaten thousands of meals together, and I laid the printed messages in front of my family. I didn't speak while they read. My mother's face went through about 7 expressions in the space of 10 minutes. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, grief. My father said nothing. He read everything twice, jaw tight, and then he set the papers down and stared at the wall. Eli said I knew something was wrong with him. I always knew. He'd felt it too, apparently, for years. He'd sensed a competitive energy in Marcus that he'd never been able to name. After everyone had read everything, I called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. I told him to come to Mom and Dad's. He said, "What's going on? Is everything okay?" I said, "Just come." He arrived 40 minutes later. I will never forget the moment he walked through that door and saw me sitting at the table. He looked at my face and I watched the color drain from his. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew. I slid the stack of papers across the table without saying a word. He didn't touch them. He just looked at them, and then he looked up at our mother. She didn't say anything. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. And then Marcus did something I was not prepared for. He sat down, and he started to cry. Not dramatic crying, not the kind you perform for a crowd. Quiet crying, the kind that comes from somewhere real. He said, "I don't know why I did it." My mother said, "Marcus." And he said it again, "I genuinely don't know why I did it." I wanted to be angry. I had been angry for 3 weeks. A cold, controlled anger that had kept me moving through every step of this plan. But watching my brother sit there, unable to explain himself even to himself, something else came through. Not forgiveness, not even close to forgiveness. But a kind of terrible clarity. I said to him, and I had not planned these words, they came out fully formed, I said, "You didn't do this to hurt me. You did it because you couldn't figure out how to be happy for me. And that's something you're going to have to live with." He didn't say anything. My father spoke for the first time. He said, "You need to leave." And Marcus stood up and he walked to the door. And just before he stepped outside, he turned around and looked at me. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something. Then he closed it. And he left. That was 14 months ago. I want to tell you that everything healed after that night. That my family closed ranks, that Marcus apologized and meant it, that Julia and I rebuilt what we lost. I want to tell you that story because it would be a better ending. But this is the truth, and I promised you the truth. Marcus and I have not spoken since that Thursday evening. My mother talks to him, I know that. I don't ask her to choose, she's his mother too, and I understand that. But there is a distance in our family now that wasn't there before, and I don't know if it ever fully closes. My father took it the hardest. He's a man of his generation, family loyalty was something close to sacred for him. What Marcus did wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of something my father had spent his life trying to build. They speak occasionally, but not the way they used to. Eli and I are closer now than we've ever been. Something about going through something like this together, sitting at that table, reading those pages, it changed our relationship. Made it real in a way it hadn't been before. And Julia. Julia and I have met for coffee a few times in the past year. It's not what it was. I don't think it will ever be what it was. That particular version of us, the version that could have existed without 4 years of quiet sabotage, is gone. You can't recover something that was taken from you before you even knew it was being taken. But there is something between us now that I didn't expect. Honesty. We talk to each other with a kind of directness we never had when we were married. Maybe because the stakes feel different now. Maybe because we both know what it costs to hold things back. She told me a few months ago that she was in therapy working through what Marcus did, working through why she'd let his voice matter as much as it did. She said it was helping. I'm glad. As for me, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I should have known, what signs I missed, whether there was a version of this where I caught it earlier, where I fought harder, where the marriage survived. I don't know if there was. What I do know is this. I spent 2 years after my divorce believing I was the problem, believing that I had failed at the most important relationship of my adult life because of some fundamental flaw in who I was. That belief shaped how I moved through those 2 years. It made me smaller, more careful, less willing to let anyone in. And Marcus knew that was happening. He saw me at family dinners. He watched me carry that weight. And he never said a word. That, more than anything, is what I cannot reconcile. Not what he did to my marriage, as monstrous as that was, but the years after, watching me believe a lie about myself and choosing to let me keep believing it. I think about the person I might have been in those 2 years if I hadn't carried that false weight. The chances I might have taken, the people I might have let in. I don't know how to grieve that exactly. But I'm trying. If you're watching this and you've been in a place where someone close to you has made you doubt yourself, made you feel like the failures in your life were your own fault when they weren't, I want you to hear something. The story you believe about yourself is not always the one that's true. Sometimes the lie isn't the one being told to other people. Sometimes the most effective lie is the one told quietly, over years, to the person standing right in front of the mirror. Check the people around you, not with suspicion but with honesty. Ask yourself who in your life leaves you feeling smaller after every conversation. Ask yourself who benefits when you don't believe in yourself. That's where I'll leave it. My brother's name is Marcus. He was the best man at my wedding. He was the first person I called when I met the woman I loved. And he spent 4 years making sure she would leave me. I don't have a clean ending for you. Life doesn't usually give those. But I have the truth. And after 2 years of carrying a lie, I'll take that.